Hello and welcome to episode 198 of the Ego Chall Podcast. My name is Preston Byers, and as always, I'm joined by my co-host, Justin Binkowski. And on today's episode, we are talking about the return of the Call of Duty League after a long off season. We are finally back. The CDL 2026 season begins this weekend. So as always, we will be talking about our predictions, our pick'ems, and obviously we did a lot of predictions on the previous show, so if you want to go back and listen or watch that, I would definitely encourage it. We went through all of the awards, all of our preseason predictions. We went through power rankings as well going into the 2026 season, and now we'll actually talk about some matches, the first week's matches. We will talk about that on today's show. We'll also talk about some other things, some smaller things as we get into the season. It's been a little bit quieter of a week on the news front, as and we've also, this is the first time we've done two shows in this close proximity in quite a while, but I'm excited to be back with Bink for another season. But before we get to any of the show today, how are you doing, Bink?
Yeah, doing all right. Like you said, first set of matches officially kicking off here in less than 48 hours. There might actually be exactly 48 hours. It's usually 3 o'clock on Friday for the first match.
Mm-hmm.
It's 3 o'clock. So almost 48 hours from now, the CDL's 2026 season will officially begin. Um, Looking forward to that. And yeah, like you said, not a ton to dive into outside of the predictions for this first set of matches, but should be a good show nonetheless. And if you did miss last week's episode, it was a bit of a lengthy one, bit of a banger, so definitely recommend going back and checking that out.
Yeah, I think we should. Obviously, we'll get to the matches this week. We'll try to make sure we hit all the stuff that has happened in the last week or so. Before we get into that, I think the biggest stuff would probably be related to this Kaysan tournament that happened recently. Obviously, we had those kickoff tournaments, including the Monster Launch Invitational, which OpTic won. They beat Paris Gentlemates, which at the time they were not the Paris Gentlemates, but they beat them in the grand finals, as well as the winners finals. I, you know, Gentlemates kind of got their lick back, so to speak. They ended up beating OpTic not once but twice in Kaysan's $50,000 tournament, and I don't know. I just overall thoughts like, do you think that means anything? Because it went to a game 7 in the grand finals of the Monster Invitational. Before that, OpTic had swept Paris in the winners finals. This time around, Paris, I'd say their run, beating LA Thieves and beating OpTic twice is a very, very good sign for the roster. But how much do you kind of read into Paris beating OpTic in this Kaysan tournament?
Yeah, it has me a little excited for the potential of this Gentleman's team even more so than we already talked about it over the last couple months, and we talked about it even more last episode. But I think if OpTic just won these first two tournaments of the year and kind of stomped everybody, it would have been a little disheartening from an objective standpoint. It'd just been like, that's we did the power rankings obviously, and I was like, I got OpTic on by themselves at the top tier, and then
Mm-hmm.
everyone below them, and it's like if OpTic had won those tournaments, I think, uh, maybe it would have, just from a competitive standpoint, people have been like, okay, this is just OpTic's year to run away with it. And then obviously, as things happen throughout the season, it might have changed, but at least heading into the season, that could have been the narrative. But now, with Gentlemates beating them in this tournament, again, it's only a 4-team tournament. It was on land, so it's
Yeah.
different than the Monster Invitational. Um, but I think that it's good from a narrative perspective and from just looking at the league as a whole. Like it just gives us more to look forward to, especially in the sense that a lot of people, uh, if they weren't rating FaZe highly, most people were looking at it OpTic and LAT as the top two teams in the league heading into this year.
Mm-hmm.
And if they were rating FaZe highly, it was a top three of OpTic, LAT, and FaZe. So Gentlemates really weren't in the consideration for a lot of people. So that just gives us another contender who's obviously, again, look, don't want to take too much from these initial tournaments, but OpTic did, before playing Gentlemates in the Monster Tournament, didn't lose a map. And now the only series they've lost in these preseason tournaments have been to Gentlemates. They've played FaZe a couple times, played LAT a couple times, and they've beaten them. So that I am, actively speaking, I think it's good for the league that we're, maybe this just builds a little bit of a rivalry between these two squads. We saw in the finals, first map, OpTic made a crazy hardpoint comeback against Gentlemates, and Dashy was standing up, like chirping at Ghosty, and it was pretty funny. And then, Gentlemates come back and win the next 4 maps to take the series. But um, just overall, it was, it's good to see a team, regardless of what the team is, just good to see kind of like a dark horse team in the eyes of a lot of people coming in hot at the start of the season or before the start of the season even, and kind of shake things up a little bit. So I'm excited. We talked about it last episode. I think highly of this Gentlemates team, and I think even if you didn't before this uh, tournament, you got to have your eyes on them heading into the season to see how they build off this initial accomplishment.
Yeah, it's always great to have our narratives reinforced going into a season, especially because I think both of us were really excited when, I mean, we've talked about it when the rosters were kind of forming, and I said, if Toronto were able to get Ghosty or Minnesota were able to get Ghosty, those teams are completely different in my mind. And then when Gentlemates got him, and they obviously put him together with Neptune, who was like kind of the breakout comeback player of the year last season, Sib, who had a down year from, I don't know individually if he had that much of a down year, but certainly from a team perspective, for sure. And then Envoy, who, I mean, he was a part of what we believe to be the best team going into champs or maybe not champs, but going into the final major. We certainly thought that he was a part of the best team. And I guess he's kind of the glue guy, even though that's not how we definitely thought about him even just a few years ago. But this roster has so much talent, and it was clear from the beginning when they put the roster together over the summer that there was a lot of talent there. I think it's very heartening to see that they are immediately showing how much talent they have, and that it isn't, something where they have to go through a month or 2 months and kind of get used to each other. It seems like they're kind of hitting the ground running. And to beat OpTic, we talked about it last week, but they're the only team in the league that has the same roster from last season coming into this season. And now they've pushed them to the brink in the grand finals of the Monster Invitational. They played them here in this Kaysan tournament. They went to Game 5. They beat them in Game 5. Then they beat them in grand finals 4-1. That's huge for them. And I think an underrated part of it, because obviously OpTic is the two-time defending world champions. They're my pick to win the championship this year. They not only beat OpTic, but they've beaten LAT, I think, 3 times now, if I'm not, or twice or 3 times in these tournaments. They swept LAT in the Monsters Invitational, and then Paris beat LAT 3-1 in the first round of this tournament. I mean, that seems significant to me, even if these tournaments are obviously not official and anything can really change once we officially get into the season. Another part of this is FaZe, because obviously every year that we've done the podcast, we've went into the year thinking FaZe is the team to beat, or one of the 2 or 3 teams to beat in the league. I don't think we feel like that this season. Obviously, this is a completely reimagined FaZe roster. No more Atlanta FaZe. This is FaZe Vegas. They don't have Celium. They don't have Abizi. That obviously is a huge change from what we've seen over the past 5 or 6 years. And in these preseason tournaments, they have not looked all that great. They beat Riyadh, which I don't know how much that really means. Then they beat Toronto in Game 5. Then they got swept by OpTic in the winners of the Monster Invitational. They dropped down to losers. They lose in Game 5 to Minnesota. Again, not sure how much that means, because Minnesota ends up going to losers finals and goes to Game 5 with Paris. So, Minnesota obviously was, they also swept LAT in that tournament. In this tournament, FaZe plays OpTic round 1. They get swept again by OpTic. So back-to-back sweeps against OpTic. They drop down to losers, and they lose 3-1 to LAT. So they don't win a match here. Obviously, it's not. It's a 4-team tournament. How concerned are you about FaZe? Not something that we typically talked about before, but going into the season, I don't think that there's ever been a FaZe team with as many red flags or yellow flags, I guess, as this FaZe Vegas team has.
Yeah, this is definitely, at least thinking about last season, it's a bit weird because last season FaZe got off to a slow start, and I didn't see it coming. I don't think you did. I don't think many people saw it coming. And then obviously they hit the winter break, come back for the minor, and they win Major 1 and Major 2. But speaking specifically on like the start of the qualifier matches, they started 0-3, I believe. And I don't think many people saw that coming. This year, they, not going to get too far ahead of ourselves. I could see another slow start in the qualifier matches for them due to the opponents that they're playing, and I wouldn't be surprised this year. So that's, obviously there are factors there, like you said, different roster, all that, yada, yada. But, yeah, especially considering the 4 teams at the Kaysan tournament, I think it, objectively speaking, FaZe were the worst team at that tournament of the top 4, and that's definitely, like you said, something that hasn't really been a topic for a lot of years, or just hasn't been a statement that needs to be said. It is weird though, because like I was just thinking about like like titles for the YouTube video or whatever, and you could do something like, is Gentlemates better than OpTic or something? And I wouldn't go that far if we were talking about it from that sense, but it is an interesting conversation to have based on what we've seen so far, just based on, Gentlemates being the only team to beat OpTic, and they did it twice at least, so it's not a one-time thing. But then we go to FaZe at the same time. It's like, oh, they're playing these top teams and they're losing, and that what does that mean for their start of the season? And I definitely it feels weird because based on FaZe's performance, I'm not super confident, especially based on their teams in this that they're playing against in the first week here. But then you look at a team like Gentlemates and you're like, oh, they beat OpTic. I'm really excited for them. So it's weird to kind of have that little ping pong there. At least in my head, that's how I'm thinking about it right now. But yeah, I think that's overall with FaZe that they, like I said, last year was not expecting that slow start in the qualifiers. This year, I could expect a little bit of a slow start. I do think from what I saw in the tournament, I was pleasantly surprised with how Abuza was playing. I thought he was playing pretty well in the hard point. I think I saw him playing in a hard point against LAT, and he was playing pretty well, but they ended up losing that map 1. And then in the search, I don't know if it was that search against LAT, but there was one search I was watching, and Abuza was playing pretty well in that too. So I think that's going to be a big factor for FaZe. Obviously, all eyes will be on the new guys and Abuza and 04 coming into a team when they're replacing guys like Celium and Abizi. But I think Abuza will be very important to FaZe's success, just because they've had that AR anchor. Like Celium's just had that main AR spot on lockdown for all these years. Now they have somebody new filling in. How does he do it? Can he come close to replicating the statistical performances? Does the play style difference? Is there a play style difference? And does that cause, a shift in success for Simp and Draza to an extent too? So there's a lot to look at with this FaZe team, but it's definitely a preseason that has not instilled a lot of confidence in me, and I think that's going to leak into the initial matches, at least for the start of the 2026 season.
I think if they do have a slow start, it's not the end of the world.
Obviously, it wasn't last year.
Yeah, the only problem this year would be if that extends into the Major 2 qualifiers. Obviously, there are 11 matches in those qualifiers, and then in Major 2. I think if it extends into that, then we have that conversation of, all right, like, what do you do here? Because if you're tanking the first set of qualifiers and even Major 1, you could come back very easily if you have basically what Vancouver did last year, where they just played lights out basically from the major two qualifiers on. FaZe, with the amount of talent that they have, obviously half of that roster is from Vancouver. That's realistic that could happen for them. But there's just so many matches in the major two qualifiers that they have to kind of be above just a mediocre team. And I think they will be. But like you said, the major one qualifiers could be a bit of a grind for them, especially with how much success they've had in the regular season over the years. Last year was the first season that FaZe had not been the number one seed going into champs. So we'll see what happens with FaZe. I don't really have too many opinions about LAT at this point. I have made it clear that I'm not very high on them, or I guess I think they're one of the 4 best teams in the league, but that is kind of a given when you have 2 of the best players in the league on your team. I just kind of expect that to be the case. But I don't know how much further I can put them up there. I don't know if I can. They're definitely going into the season not going to be like the second best team, because I personally think that Paris is probably the second best team going into the season. I don't know how easily they could fall out of the top 4, but we didn't get to see Minnesota at this Kaysan tournament, and Minnesota had a very good showing in the Monster Invitational. Cloud9, I had no idea if they're actually going to be anything. Some of these other teams, like Miami, we'll see what happens with their roster, but I think it's something to watch out for. LAT is going to be, in my opinion, because I already expect OpTic and Paris to be very good. I think LAT is the most interesting team, at least early in this season. Granted, maybe Miami could be up there. I just hope that Treyarch is able to play and we don't have any issues like that. But I think LAT is very, very interesting, both from a good and bad perspective. I don't know if you feel the same way going into the season.
In terms of LAT?
Yeah, I just think that watching them over, especially before the winter break, will be probably the thing that I'm most closely paying attention to, is how they look, especially in relation to the top teams. I don't know how much I can really take from the preseason tournaments because they've had some good and some bad in these tournaments. But I think the first few weeks of the season, I'm going to be throwing out some claims, I think, in the first few weeks of the season is all I'll say.
All I'll say is I think if they have like a slow start to the season here, we could maybe start to look at the consideration of like Scrap and Hydra having like just being players that take a little bit of time to get used to a new game or acclimated to a new title.
Mm-hmm.
We always, some of the, I don't really know if stereotype is the right word, but some of the, topics that have always been things really over the years, where it was always like OpTic having slow starts to tournaments on Fridays or Thursdays, and then they would, go on these runs and still end up in the finals. There was that time for the Dynasty when it was like they can't win a search, but it didn't matter because they're just going to win the 3 respawns in a best of 5, and then they win the series 3-1. We've seen some other teams, like Slasher last year being on a team that starts off strong. We've seen him historically have some pretty solid start to the season, and then towards the end, they don't always, follow through with the same results. So, who knows? Maybe on a similar note, if Slasher gets another strong start to the season this year, he'll be that guy that we look at. Okay, yeah, he's really good at the start of games, and then conversely, maybe LAT is in a position, especially or specifically Scrap and Hydra, who are just, it might take them a little bit to get going, because obviously last year, like, they actually played pretty well in the opening qualifiers, I think, and then they got to the finals of Major 1, stumbled a bit at Major 2, and then they had the back-to-backs at Major 3 and Major 4, so that they did get into that quote-unquote super team form that a lot of people expected in, but it took a little bit of time. So I think that's what I'll be most looking at for this LAT team. As Scrap's been pretty vocal on Twitter about some of the GAs and some of the stuff he doesn't like, and, historically, it makes me think of Aches. Like, there were games probably the first game in the CDL title when there was that big whole debate about, oh, there's going to be this game-changing update to MW 2019, so we're not going to practice on this old game and just have it be useless. And then that update never came, and then that LAG team got dismantled, and Aches was out of the CDL in a couple months. So um, I just think that it's possible for players who are vocal or just have some things that we know as a community that they have issues with a game that could impact performance. If they're not enjoying the game, they might just not play as well. But obviously, Scrap's the reigning MVP, so I expect him to still be an MVP caliber player. We'll just have to wait and see. I do think, we saw last year when, I think you brought up last episode, Nadeshot got did that like infamous tweet after the minor or whatever when they didn't play well or whatever. We might see. I did see a clip actually of Nadeshot talking, and he's like, I'm expecting a couple championships from Hydra and Scrap this year at least before their contract's up, and then they either end up getting the bag from Falcons or going to a team like OpTic or something like that. I was like, that's a pretty crazy statement, but it's not the first time we've heard Nadeshot say something like that, and obviously it kind of worked out last year. It's just they didn't end up winning champs or EWC, and those are the big ones. So yeah, kind of a little bit of a tangent there, but I think overall I still have high expectations for this LAT team. It just might be a case where it takes a little bit of time for them to get going.
So what's Scrap's opinion on the 2 lives per sniper rule? Because that is one of the weirder, I guess, compromises in CDL history I can remember with the GA. So we talked about this, might have been last episode, maybe 2 episodes ago now, but we talked about the idea of snipers in the CDL, and I think it was last episode now I'm talking about it. And the snipers are very OP in this game, at least with how things are with smokes and the counters to snipers at this point. So
yeah, I actually.
yeah,
go ahead.
I was just gonna say, so what they're basically trying to do is, instead of saying, hey, we're not going to have snipers, because I ranted on the last episode that it is like a crucial part of the identity of Call of Duty and even competitive Call of Duty. But the idea is, if you don't die with a sniper, or if you die once with a sniper, you can basically keep it basically for the whole match. But if you die twice, you cannot have a sniper again if you have the sniper to begin with. I did not explain that very well, but what did you think of this kind of idea for a compromise of how snipers could work in this season of the CDL?
Yeah, so Scrap was actually the clip of Scrap talking about this on stream was the first time I saw it, and then Breaking Point was talking about it a little bit on the Dope Check, I believe. And I really like the idea. And Scrap in his clip says, you only have 2 lives with it, but if they take the aim assist off, they being the devs, then the 2 live rule will go out the window. And he says most pros think this idea is cool. So I think it's really interesting, and I do think it's a solid compromise. I think, some people in the community over the years have tried to compare COD to Counter-Strike.
Yep.
And
we had that game mode.
While I think there are some undeniable similarities, there are also a lot of differences, and one of them being like the economy system and everything like that. But over the years in competitive Call of Duty, there have been, although there's no economy, there has been more of, back in the very early days, if you were in a 1v4 situation, you're always going for the 1v4. You're not jumping off the map or trying to save your gun or anything like that. And that sort of, maybe not the save your gun element of it, but I feel like when there were some maps where offense was better than defense in S&D, people were jumping off the map in quote-unquote unwinnable situations to avoid giving the other team a kill, which would help them get whatever side they wanted in that particular map. And, in CS, we see that. That's where I was going, is like you got somebody with the AWP, which is, I believe, the most expensive gun in
believe
Counter
so, yeah.
Strike. Um, if your opper is like in a 1v4 1v5 situation, you're like, yeah, don't clutch that, save that op, and so we have it for next round and we don't lose like $6,000 or whatever it is. um and then that results in the other team trying to hunt them down and all that stuff, so it's pretty cool. But long story short, I do think this idea is very interesting, and I think it is a solid compromise in the current state, because I do think it will add a little bit of that element to it. If your sniper is your last person alive and they're in a 1v3 situation, you're most likely going to tell them, hey, just sit down, go somewhere and hide so we don't lose that life for the sniper. Um, or at the same time, if that guy's feeling really confident and they haven't lost a life, they're like, yeah, screw it, I'm going for this 1v3 with the sniper, and then we get some sick clips out of it. So I do think there will be a little bit of a give and take there. And I do think one interesting wrinkle in this, which I think, again, there's no official rule for it, so it'll be weird to see how it's policed. But
Yeah.
in theory, let's say I'm in a 1v3 situation, I'm the team sniper, and I'm like, okay, I don't want to go for this with the sniper, but my dead teammate's body's over there with the M15. I'm going to drop this sniper, pick up the AR, and I'm going to go for the 1v3 with the AR. Does that count as losing a life with the sniper? Because I started the round using the sniper, but I didn't die with the sniper. So I feel like they would count that, but
Yeah.
again, there's no like official rule or anything like that. So that's where there's going to be a little bit of a gray area. Um, and it will be interesting, the first time somebody accidentally uses a sniper for 3 rounds instead of 2, it's going to be all up in arms. And
Hmm.
I feel like it's pretty obvious it'll inevitably happen, just even on accident, because I don't even know what, like, the class switching timer is. Maybe like the guy will have to throw a nade at their feet and kill themselves in the round S&D, which that would be crazy too. So a lot of stuff involving this concept, but from a very basic level, I am a huge fan of this. I think it's a great way to get the sniper into the game without having it completely take over a game. Because yeah, thinking about it from a Counter-Strike perspective, a lot of people love op clips and love when people go for those plays, but with it being such an expensive weapon, I don't think Counter Strike even 30 rounds anymore. I think they shut it, like lowered it to 12 or 13 for the win. So
Hmm.
like in like a 24 round CS:GO match, you maybe see the op on an average 6 to 10 rounds, maybe, like depending on if that person is just going off with it and staying alive and keeping it. But if that guy's like buying it, dying, and then having to wait a couple rounds to build up the money to buy it again, like I feel like 6 to 10, somewhere in that range, is probably the average you're seeing it. Um, in a CS:GO match or CS2 now. So comparatively, you translate that to an 11 round S&D with 2 lives. Like it's not exactly similar, but it's kind of close. I don't know. We'll have to see how it works out. But I am excited. I like that. It feels like it's a competitive minded, like the players. I don't know who spearheaded this or really sat back and thought about it, but it feels like it has that like competitive integrity in mind and is mindful of that. And I like that aspect of it. Like they're instead of, we've talked about it before, like the Maddox is coming tomorrow with the season 1 update, and that's not going to affect these initial matches. But the Maddox, an iconic AR gun from Black Ops 4, it's a DLC weapon in this game. Probably 99% chance it's insta GA, never even tried,
Hmm.
and never sees the light of day in Black Ops 7. But maybe with like a competitive mindset tweak like this with the sniper, maybe it's like, okay, we got to try this DLC gun out a little bit. So maybe I'm rambling. Maybe this is the start of some more experimentation with some of the GAs. I don't know. I don't want to get too excited, but overall, from just the sniping perspective, I like the idea of 2 lives per S&D. I think it's going to have a good balance between, well, the alternative was just no snipers involved at all, and
Hmm.
both of us said we didn't like that. So overall, yeah, I like this idea. It will be interesting to see how it plays out.
I think this is a good first step toward what should actually happen. I'm not just speaking in the short term. The short term is fix the smokes, and it pretty much solves a lot of this issue. Like uh, I guess I'll start with this. Everything in Call of Duty should have a counter. I think that's very widely agreed upon. If there's a very good sniper, then you have to have smokes that can block that sniper from seeing, basically. And we had it previously in Black Ops 2, where the thermal was very good and people would start running Ghost so they could not be seen by thermal. That is kind of what we need in Call of Duty in general. If you have a stun, you have tac mask that works and basically negates the stun. And the tac mask literally takes up a spot that you could use for something else, and that is the sacrifice that you make. Same with flak jacket and frag grenade. So we've talked about this all before, but that idea needs to be like a through line for developers for the rest of time. And that's not in just Call of Duty, that is every game basically ever. There should always be some kind of counter in some shape or form that a player can do to basically negate the effect of something their opponent can do to them. But I think in general, this could be, and I've really never thought of this before, that this should be the beginning of field upgrades or score streaks or specialist items just being like these really like run-of-the-mill weapons. Like, I hate Dead Silence being a field upgrade. I think that's really stupid in general. I get the thinking behind it because you think, okay, this is a really great perk to have, and we're going to give it to you. Not every round, but you can earn it through how you play. But I think the sniper, kind of the same way in Counter-Strike that we have the op, is it's not something you can just get every round. It's something you have to earn. And I kind of like that for Call of Duty as well, where, hey, we would probably need to make it so, guns are easily like swappable between players and everything, like Counter-Strike, where, your teammate can have the money and they will buy the op for you, and they'll throw you the op and you can buy an AK and throw them that, to swap them. Call of Duty needs something, in effect to be similar, where, hey, like, I'll get an M4 and you get the sniper and let's switch. So, but the idea, I think, is good, that it's just something you earn. It's a reward. It makes it special to have it. So it does kind of make it more of like a finite resource in the game. But you also get those clips. You also get those moments of snipers on the map, and it makes it a lot more dangerous. It also makes the other team have to count and worry about, like, okay, like, they do have enough points or enough kills to have a sniper on the map now, so we have to keep that in mind, or we're absolutely going to get wrecked when we cross mid this round. That's stuff that I think is very good for competitive. I've said it before, like, Call of Duty should take a lot of things from Counter-Strike. They don't need to be Counter-Strike, but Counter-Strike is a competitive game at heart. Like, it knows what it is, and that is why it's the most successful first-person shooter over the last decade or so, and it's why, like, I was huge into Counter-Strike for years and years. I mean, I think I cried after Cloud9 won the Boston Major or whatever that was in like 2018, 2019. But like, that was a huge moment. I didn't even really care about Counter-Strike in that moment, but it was the game itself makes you care. And I think that's what Call of Duty needs. Like, it's never going to have that with respawns. The games move way too fast, but in terms of search and destroy, they could have that. They could have these field upgrades where it's a sniper, or it's I don't know what the more would be in terms of that. What other ideas there would be where it doesn't get people like super turned off by the idea, but I think that those things could happen and should happen.
Well, remember the start of the beta, everyone was freaking. I don't even know if it's actually a field upgrade or a score streak, but there was the sniper where people were like sniping through walls.
Oh yeah.
Yeah, so like, there's obviously no competitive, and well, we've talked about it enough. There's no competitive priorities invested from the developers, and a lot of the Call of Duty stuff. Call of Duty is always a casual game first and competitive afterwards. So there was no thinking about it from that perspective. But maybe that is a step in the right direction in terms of like, we got the super OP sniper that was, sniping collateral people across the map through 17 walls. Maybe we just tone that down to a regular sniper, and that's how it works. I don't know. That would be interesting, and again, another pipe dream here, but we've talked about it in the sense of like the Call of Duty mobile version of uh, coming over to an esport. Maybe there would be some version of customability in that where you could make just the regular sniper with no attachments as the field upgrade. That would be, there's already, I don't know what the rule is going to be this year, but in previous years we've seen like, you're only allowed 2 trophies per team or whatever, and the other people have like the assault pack, the ammo pack thing that they aren't allowed to use, and they just have it on as the field upgrade so that they don't pick anything else. Maybe that's one way around this, if we somehow had a way to customize the field upgrade in private matches and have that be like earnable. I don't know. That's an interesting idea though, but I think we are not anywhere close to having that be an actual thing.
I think the specialists, I always hated the specialists because the idea never really made sense. Like it was just so like unlike the rest of the game. Like, okay, we're having like a normal gunfight, and then you bring out a flamethrower. Like that's not something that you can really prepare for. There's no like counter to this flamethrower unless you have a flamethrower yourself. Like that is kind of the silliness. But like something like the Tempest, which I think if it was, hey, like it, because that was a very hard gun to use at times, because I don't think it had aim assist, or the aim assist was like less than what normal guns were. But something like that, not including the chain, because that one really screwed over a bunch of people. But like if that was just the sniper that you got was this really powerful weapon, and that's what you get. That could be something. And specialists are not new to Call of Duty. It's been a thing for multiple games with varying degrees of success. I don't want to bring back the grav spikes or anything, but I think weapons and like very realistic abilities is something that could work in Call of Duty. And maybe this sniper, this 2 lives per sniper rule is a step in that direction, but we've talked about it so much in the past before. It takes the developers, it takes those people to realize what's going on and to be on board with it and to put it into action. Because if it's just on the pros, this kind of stuff will die out and people will get mad, like you said, once somebody uses it for 3 rounds or 3 lives, and people gripe and they say like they're cheating or whatever. Or when, God forbid, you get to a grand finals and it's S&D, game 7 or whatever. Hey, I'm not going to use 2 lives. I'm going to use all 11 of these lives if I need them. And I'm going to snipe every round. And if you're pissed at me afterward, then so be it, right? Like we talked about that so much before with snaking and every other GA'd idea, but that's reality. And I don't think that this is going to be even more, even tougher, I guess, to police. This is kind of like almost not to the same extent, but like ATS was pretty hard to police for teams, like even to the point that people were like, I have no idea, like if anybody's using it. Like if you're good at movement, maybe you're using ATS.
It's going to be on the observers a little bit too,
Yeah.
because I don't think it's going to happen, just because like somebody sees a sniper, there's a good chance that they're just going to pop over to their POV. But in theory, there's a chance that somebody pulls out a sniper, it's not picked up on the broadcast, and nobody knows about it. So there's also a chance that we don't know about it on the broadcast if they don't pick it up, but the players in game like see the scope glint or whatever you call that, when like you see the little light from somebody aiming down sights, but we don't see it on the broadcast, and then the players are mad after the game saying like you used it too many times, but we don't know about it because we didn't see it, yada yada. Yeah, long story short, cool idea. We'll have to see how it's, implemented and actually enforced.
You know what is also a cool idea? Inviting the CDL pros out to meet the developers before a game's release. And you know what's not a great idea? Only one of those guys showing up and talking with the devs. Um, that might seem random, but that was also something that happened this week. There was a tweet originally by Rebel underscore on Twitter. And he said, Miles Ross just revealed on BenJ's stream that all 48 CDL pros after BO6 champs were invited to meet with Treyarch and the devs prior to BO7's release. Guess how many showed up? One. Guess who? Dan Ghosty. I absolutely love Dan Ghosty. Apparently that clip was not correct. Parts of it were, I guess, like a little nugget of it was correct, but not fully. So Jacob Hale, formerly of Dexerto, now I believe at like Esports Insider, if I'm not mistaken, he said clarification from Spence Spence. He quote tweeted Spencer Peterson, who we didn't get to the bottom of like what his actual title was. I think it's like director of ops, but he's basically really hands-on with the CDL operations on the day-to-day basis. But Spence said, I'll clear this one up a bit, and sorry to Miles for this one. It was prior to BO6, and it was only for team reps, so one for each team. Ghosty was indeed the only one to show up. So it makes it better, I guess, right? But it's not good regardless, because instead of it being all 48 pros, it's 12 pros got invited, and one of them showed up, and he would have been with LAT at the time, so that was the only team represented in that meeting. That's just a really bad look. I know there were people complaining, or I guess trying to say that this is before Esports World Cup. I don't know the exact timeline on these things, but like unless they were on the flight to Saudi Arabia, I think it was probably worth going out to LA and spending a day at Treyarch and talking with them, because I know every single one of these guys just bitches and moans on Twitter about it. So like maybe bitch and moan to the people specifically that are going to either make your lives really good or ruin your lives for the next 6 to 8 months. Because if you don't show up, obviously like BO6 is come and gone. We're on to BO7, right? But there were certainly complaints about BO6. Could all of them have been changed by this meeting? No, I don't believe that whatsoever. Could some of them have been addressed? Could some of these things that they inevitably complained about once the game was released in November, could that have been resolved, or could they have been addressed in some shape or form? Of course. Like there's no way that like when the pros go and say it's Shotzi, it's Ghosty, it's whatever, like it wouldn't be, it could be Hydra, because he might not have been the team rep or whatever, but like you get the point. Like a guy from FaZe, OpTic, LAT, NYSL, Minnesota, Vancouver, they all go, and it's like, this is really stupid. Like we can't play that. Like that's not gonna work. The devs might not fix it, but it's at least worth telling them to their face that it's not going to work and they need to fix it. They need to do something differently. I just can't believe that only one person showed up. Obviously, Ghosty had the time. I don't know, like, I guess he doesn't have a life or whatever. Like, but what's the point of not showing up? I really don't get that. I would assume that you feel very similarly to me, that this is kind of ridiculous not to show up to one of these things.
Yeah, so not even from a community perspective, I'm going to speak just from my perspective personally. I know the community has as well, but I have been very vocal over the years and on this podcast about the feeling of a lack of support and effort from the devs for a community standpoint. We even just a couple minutes ago talked about how COD's casual first and competitive not even second, just an afterthought almost. And maybe it's at the point now where like that bridge has just been burned, and the players are like, I don't even want to give the effort when it feels like the devs aren't reciprocating it or aren't actually trying, whatever, yada yada. I'm not going to make excuses. based on the information that we know here, that the devs were trying to do something, and it's actually it's apparently Treyarch who historically have been the most helpful competitive devs from a competitive standpoint, and it's not like it was one of the other studios or something like that. Um, I just feel like, if I have been vocal about this feeling of a lack of support from the devs and everything in the past, it is not right for me to not be vocal about my feeling towards the players having an opportunity to do something and then only one of them potentially showing up. Whatever the case may have been, whenever it was, I don't want to make excuses. We don't know all the information, yada yada. It's just not a good look, especially from the outside looking in when we've had these conversations the other way around, where it's like players feel like they want changes. You said they complain and everything online, and then nothing ever gets changed. This was a case where something in theory could have been fixed, or something could have been discussed that changed the game for the better, and that opportunity was just wasted. So I think, you know regardless of when it happened, what the circumstances were, all that, at the end of the day, we at least know that Treyarch devs are trying, which is a good sign. And hopefully, there was a picture tweeted before the beta of like players going to Treyarch to test Black Ops 7. So maybe this was just something that happened last year, and then this year was a little bit better attendance, and maybe that helps overall. I don't know. Don't know all the circumstances, and I don't want to go too crazy with it because we don't have all the info. But end of the day, it is a bad look if only one person showed up, regardless of who was invited or how many people and all that. Especially when, like you said, some of the people who were most likely invited are some of the people who most likely were complaining at some point during the Black Ops 6 season about something that potentially could have been addressed many, many months before the game even actually got in their hands.
Yeah, it's not a great look. I think I've said it before, like just the like pros, even top AMs, I mean, like who cares at this point? Like those guys should get like early access. Like they should be basically quality testing the games like months before release, because these, I mean, let's be real, let's be frank, and let's be a little bit rude. The devs are not very good at these games. Like we know that. Like we've seen them play. They're fine for the average player, but the CDL players are so much better and so much better at exploiting things in the game than anybody else. They understand. I mean, just look at Shotzi, right? Like Shotzi does stuff movement wise that I don't think the devs were even really considering as like a possibility sometimes. But that's what happens. Shotzi gets in the game and he starts hopping around the map, and you're like, all right, I guess that's what happens. And then everybody else does it, and either the devs have to patch that or they have to just go along with it. But these guys should be in there, and they should invite them out every few months maybe as they're developing these games. Maybe when there's a break between majors or whatever, and be like, hey, just come out for a day or two, talk with us, test the game out, and then you guys can fly back. Obviously, everything would be under an NDA, but this is what we're going to try to accomplish here. And I think it's been proven over the years that that is a good idea, because we saw in World War II that Rambo was very heavily involved at Sledgehammer at the time. And that was probably the most, I don't want to say like highly thought of, but kind of in a way, the rank system was pretty well liked. And it was because Rambo and former pros and current pros were pretty hands-on about it and like giving a lot of feedback, and people seem to enjoy that. I think that there's probably a lot of wasted space there. I think there's a wasted opportunity in that, and I hope that something like this and being called out. I know some pros have said like this is cap, this didn't happen. I would not expect any of them to admit that. Like, I would expect somebody to be like, I was busy. This was before EWC. I didn't have time or whatever. I don't expect the guys like that don't wake up until 4 p.m. in the afternoon and don't show up. This is like a 2K, 5K situation where it's like they just go missing for hours at a time. Like, I don't expect some of them to own up to not getting the opportunity to talk to the devs directly about the game that they play professionally. So I don't expect that, but I do believe there's no reason that Miles would lie. There's no reason for Spence to lie like so brazenly on Twitter about this, right? Like, and it's such a random thing to say that Ghosty was the only one. So like he could verify like, yes, I did go and I did meet the devs and I was the only CDL pro there. So just a really silly situation, just in total. Another thing that we should talk about before we get into the matches is this report by Sheep Esports. So they were talking about the CDL, and in part of their report, they said the model announced for 2026 appears far less assuring, and they were referencing how the CDL had waived all of the unpaid entry fees for the league's teams, and that they had actually reimbursed fees that had already been paid, and that some teams had received $2 million from the publisher, and then the I guess the split between who gets what for I guess like the in-game stuff had been kind of moved around. There was a guarantee of around $500,000, which they said was enough for teams to ensure payment for almost the entire roster, which, yeah, I mean, some teams were banking a little bit of money. I would imagine Paris was literally making like $450,000 off of that deal. But then Sheepy Sports said the model announced for 2026 appears far less assuring. From now on, teams will only receive the proportional share of their sales, with early estimates of around $100,000 for some clubs. This model directly impacts clubs struggling to sell enough items, which could spell uncertainty for their future. And then Adamau, I think that's how you say it. He is the co-founder and CEO of Overactive Media, which is the owner of Toronto Koi, formerly the Toronto Ultra. He said on Twitter in response to this, he said, "Not sure who the sources are here, but this change was agreed over 2 years ago and has been rolled out over the last 3. Every team was aware. It is why you are seeing so much rebranding and bigger brands entering. Full access to our MTX sales is a huge opportunity." I'm not going to act like I know a ton about the business aspect of the CDL. I think I don't know how to really say this. I think that it is really stupid for Activision or Microsoft to penny pinch with esports, because despite what we're going through right now in esports, this is the next big sport in our sport type in our world. It is, I think, it would behoove everybody to buy in on the ground floor and not sell like the dipshits that did over the last 5 years. This is obviously not a great time to buy into esports, is what it seems. But when something is so low, and there's no way that this will not work out. Esports, maybe Call of Duty esports is different. Maybe Call of Duty esports will not be the big moneymaker that Counter-Strike or League of Legends or Valorant will be, or is certainly. But it makes a ton of sense to say, hey, we're going to spend $500,000 on, from Activision's point of view. I think it would make a lot of sense to be like, hey, we're going to spend $500,000 per team. That's about $6 million for the league in terms of guaranteed income. We're going to spend a little bit more on marketing and putting on these events and stuff. Let's say $10 million. Maybe I'm over or underestimating. Let's say we're spending $10 million per year on the Call of Duty League. Activision, Microsoft, these are multi-billion-dollar companies. $10 million is toilet paper to them. Like, there's no reason to not believe that $10 million is so insignificant that it's an investment, a very tiny investment of the company's resources. That being said, I completely understand why some teams are changing things around, why they have to defend this. I mean, they're partners in these leagues, technically. So I get that point, but the crux of this is that Toronto will not be one of those organizations, as at least among the top, like FaZe, OpTic, Thieves. They're not going to be one of those orgs that really benefit from this, because the orgs that really benefit are going to be the really big name brands. Maybe Koi will help. I don't know.
That's
Yeah, the European thing is probably underrated, in a blind spot for me. But certainly in North America, I think it's definitely a bigger thing for FaZe, Thieves, Cloud9, OpTic. Even G2 is probably more known in North America and more popular in North America than Koi. Trying to think of like who else is even in the league, but I would just say like it's a big risk for these teams, but I don't think they have any leverage about like getting guaranteed income at this point in time. Like they don't have anything to really show that, hey, like we're deserving of this extra $400,000, for example.
I just think, not going to get too into this because, again, similar to the last topic, we don't know all the info and all the details around it. I just think it's very interesting that this report came out and it's allegedly been a thing that's already been in place over a couple of years, according to the Toronto guy. So either there's conversations that are happening about further change or just, I mean, Sheep Esports is pretty good about League of Legends roster reports. They've been like, the last couple seasons, they've been at the top of that. So maybe there's like some unclear or lack of clarity from sources in terms of the business reporting aspect of this for the CDL. I don't know. I'm not going to just completely dismiss the report, but so there has to be some element to the report that ties into potentially something that coming down the road, or like this has just been a thing in the past and we just didn't know about it and it's just being reported now. I don't really know. All I'll say is that, using a previous example, I think it's pretty silly that potentially OpTic Gaming was getting like the same revenue share or whatever as a team, like you said, like Paris Legion, who like was just phoning it in and not doing anything. And then OpTic is most likely at the top of any of these potential sales or anything like that. So I think from that perspective, that like, if that's the change that happened to where now it would be in a position where OpTic is going to make more than a team like Paris Legion because OpTic has the fans, I think that makes more sense to me. But that's, don't know all the business side of it and everything like that. So I don't know. But I do, it is interesting to see how this will potentially impact some teams, if it, or how it has over the years, if it really is the reason for some of these rebrands. That's kind of an interesting thing to think about. But I'm not, doesn't really impact me from a business perspective, and I don't know much about it, so I'm not gonna, lose any sleep over it. I guess we'll just see if we learn anything else about potential further changes or anything like that over the coming months.
We should also mention that the figures that Sheep Esports listed for the actual team sales, like how many units were sold and like how much revenue they brought in per team. I think I just clicked out of it. But there was a person from FaZe, I want to say, that said like this is not those figures are not accurate at all. So like take it with a grain of salt, I guess. I think the point still remains though that the small teams will not benefit. Like it's a big blow to them, I would imagine. Like $100,000, even though there is no minimum in the CDL anymore. I don't know if you're really attracting guys. Be like, hey, we're gonna pay you $15,000 a year. Like they do have to live at some point. Um, I just don't know. I think it's a weird situation to be in for these teams because a lot of them have exited. Because if you look at the original 12 CDL teams and who was backing them, a lot of them are not there anymore. So you would imagine that the teams that are still here are kind of believers in the cause, so to speak. But, they have to make money and they have to at least not lose more money than they can afford to lose is probably the best way of putting it. Also, I would just say with the cosmetic stuff, like that's on Activision. Like those stink most of the time, and they never come out when they're supposed to. So I don't know. Like to me, all of it is kind of flawed in the end because it comes back to Activision like really not putting in the effort and not being as smart and on top of things as they should be, and that in effect hurts the CDL because the teams say, well, we're not making enough money from either the guaranteed revenue or the actual revenue we get from these cosmetics. So I just think it's a really weird situation and overall, and it's probably something to keep monitoring as we go through the year because we have basically seen new teams come in almost every year in the CDL's existence, and maybe we'll see more of that happen after this season. Finally, we have the matches, the Major 1 Week 1 matches.
Oh, yeah.
The CDL officially begins on Friday, like Bink said a little bit earlier. It starts around 3 p.m. Eastern. Starts with OpTic versus the Falcons, the Riyadh Falcons. So Pred versus his old team, Celium, against OpTic once again. OpTic obviously coming in as the two-time defending world champions. The Falcons coming in as the defending Paris Legion Memorial Award winners. They're still technically, even though they rebranded from Vegas to Riyadh, they are not getting off on that. I mean,
that's not where I was going.
Oh, okay. I think it's pretty clear that we're both going to pick OpTic here. It'd be kind of crazy to pick Falcons, but obviously OpTic looked like shit at the beginning of last season, and
last year it started. OpTic won champs, and their first match of the season was against Boston, who was the worst team.
Paris Legion Memorial Award winners.
Yeah. So this is literally the same matchup, just a different team playing against OpTic, but it's technically the last place team still. So maybe that's another thing we got to keep an eye on. But yeah, I'm going with OpTic here. Can't pick against them against this Falcons team just yet.
If the Falcons had a good showing at the Monster Invitational, maybe there's something there. But them being the only CDL team to lose to a Challengers team, and that Challengers team employing Doug Sensor Martin, really makes me think that they might not be good to start out the season, is all I'll say.
It was the second match of the season last year. First match of the season last year was Minnesota versus LAG, RIP LAG. But second match of the season last year was Boston versus OpTic, and Boston won 3-2. So,
what a weird match to start off the CDL season with, Minnesota versus LAG. I think we talked about that last season too. It's just like why are we starting? But obviously LAG was like the most popular team in the league for a little bit until they cratered. Next up, Carolina versus Boston. I think this is a really tough match because Carolina looked really good the Monster Invitational. Boston did not look very good. Boston has a ton of kind of history with this roster, excluding Nasty. Like he's the only one that's coming into the team, and they have a ton of chemistry going for them. Carolina is just like a whole new roster, but they look good. I'll go with Carolina, but I think this goes either way.
All right. Well, I was taking Carolina because I was assuming you were going to pick off Boston, but I forgot last episode you said you had Boston as your team to come in last this year. So maybe it's a switch up in the pick 'em. But yeah, I'm going with Carolina. I've been against Boston most of last year, and their showing at the initial tournament didn't inspire any confidence for me. This is also another matchup between Slasher and Snoopy. So interesting narrative there, but I think we're kind of past that at this point, but still might be some bit of extra fuel for Slasher, at least it seems like. So yeah, give me Carolina here. I'm not really very high on either of these teams, but I think Carolina at least won a match at that Monster Invitational. Boston lost to a Surge team that a lot of people are expecting to get off to a very slow start. So yeah, I'll take Carolina here.
We're only past the Slasher versus Snoopy stuff if Slasher wins. If Snoopy wins, we're all in. Like, hang the banner. FaZe versus LAT to round out Friday's matches. I mean, there's no reason to believe that FaZe should win this, considering what we've seen of them. LAT on paper even looks like a better team at this point. So I'm going to go with the Thieves.
Yeah, this is what I was talking about earlier. Tough first match for, I mean, in theory, both teams, but it's specifically a tough start for FaZe, especially their next match we'll get to in a bit is against Gentlemate, so it's against two of the teams that were at the Kaysan Invitational. Talked about in earlier episodes how I'm a fan of the Major 2 setup where every team plays every other team, so there's not these instances where like FaZe inevitably is going to have one of the harder strength of schedules for this opening qualifiers, while other teams might not even have to play LAT and Gentlemates, maybe only one of them. So tough draw, but yeah, I think I got to go with LAT here. We just saw this at the Kaysan tournament, and LAT won it, so will be the first official CDL matchup of Simp versus BZ, so that's interesting. And as always, the Draza versus Scrap showdown, which they did. There was some like I don't know if it was a Kaysan tournament, but there was like a 2v2 thing, and like they actually fist bumped after the match. That was kind of a big deal because obviously before it was just flipping the bird or not even like looking each other away and stuff like that. So maybe they're moving on from past drama in a little bit to the point of at least fist bumping. We'll have to see how that goes once we get to land. But yeah, I'll take LAT here.
Saturday, December 6th. First match is Toronto versus Miami.
Banger.
I do believe so, but I also looked at the Miami Twitter account and I looked at Trake's Twitter account. I did not see any update on what's going on. I'm going to assume good things. So I'm going to assume that Trake's is going to play in this match. That is a bad assumption probably because they did not say anything. Like they even put him on the graphic of the Monster Invitational tournament, and then they put on like the tweet lower is like, due to visa issues, he will not be playing. So maybe they'll do that here. I'm going to assume that Trake's is going to be in this match, and I'm going to assume that Miami is going to win with Trake's in his debut.
Wow. So yeah, this is Real's first match against his former team. There's been some bad blood on social media between Toronto and Miami from an organization standpoint. So I'm really excited for this one. I gotta go with Toronto. My boy Kleenex. I've been a big fan of Real, going back to the initial days there with Miami, but I think he gets the win here over his former team. And yeah, I don't, even if I knew for sure if Treyarch was playing, I think I would pick Toronto in this match. We don't know what the case is. I looked at Eric Boom's Twitter, and Eric Boom tweeted on November 29th he scrimmed versus Miami Heretics, and I tried to go to he like linked his Twitch. I tried to go to it, but he doesn't have VODs enabled for recent streams, so I wasn't able to see who he was playing with or who Miami was playing with. But even just yesterday, Eric Boom was scrimming against Bush Gaming, which is the Barstool TJ Halley Challengers team. So it's possible that at the very least, Miami isn't using Eric Boom if Trakes is available, but maybe that's just a sign Trakes is gonna play. I just think, end of the day, we'll have to wait and see. But I'm not picking Miami either way. So give me Toronto in this battle of the. I don't know. We're gonna have to come up with a name for this rivalry, the Real rivalry. There we go.
It's gonna be some disrespectful reaction, some graphic after this match.
Oh yeah.
I'm interested just to see who gets to post theirs, and they should send the other one to like Timbuktu. Like they always send like the losing championship teams like merch to Africa. if they lose the World Series or whatever. So I need them to send like this graphic to like a Challenger's social media manager and then they post it. I don't know if that's the same thing, but I think it would be funny regardless. Next match, Vancouver versus the Paris Gentlemates. Obviously, the debut officially of the Paris Gentlemates, of both the return to Paris, quote unquote, and the Gentlemates, because we had the Gorillas mates last year. It's obviously going to be Paris. This is potentially, the best team or second best team, depending if how high you are on Paris, versus potentially the worst team in the league at this point. Not saying that Vancouver can't pull off the upset, but it does seem to be just teams that are just on different playing fields, at least to start this season.
Yeah, this is what I was joking with you last episode about. Is I can't bring myself to call Gentlemates Parrots yet. So for me, they're Gentlemates right now. I think of Paris and CDL. I think of the Legion. Same with FaZe. I'm not gonna bring myself to call them Vegas just yet. Maybe as we get through these matches, I'll get more used to it. But it still feels weird to me. So I'm picking Gentlemates here. Not picking Paris. I'm picking Gentlemates.
Yeah, if we start calling them Paris, then they'll be awful and they'll lose a bunch of matches. G2 Minnesota versus Cloud9 New York. Also, the debut of G2 Minnesota. Not great on the branding, I would say. Although if they keep the logo, so they've been using the Rocker Viking logo, like a different version of it. It's like kind of shiny. If they just put that up there, like I'm cool. Like, I don't care about the name that much. But once they start using that little rinky dinky G2 Minnesota actual like type logo, I'm just not in on it. So
they adjusted the logo. Like,
yeah,
it's got the red eye for the G2 Samurai.
I just don't want them to ever use the type logo. I don't ever want to see like G2 on screen.
Okay.
So that's my thing. Like, I'm cool otherwise. I'm going to go with G2. Obviously, these were two kind of breakout teams in the Monster Invitational. Kind of surprising. I'm not high on both or either team. I'm less not high, I guess, on C9. So I'll go G2.
Yeah, this is the one I was before the Monster Invitational. I had C9 picked here just because I've given the spiel a little bit now. I think C9 is a team that could be a little bit of a sneaky underdog and get off to a hot start to start the year. But we saw this matchup in the losers semifinals of the Monster Invitational, and G2 beat Cloud9 3-1. So I got to pick G2 here again.
And then Sunday, December 7th, starting off with LAT versus Falcons. I don't know what the Falcons did to deserve this, but
this is like FaZe and Falcons both having tough draws.
Yeah, so Falcons, they play OpTic on Friday, LAT on Sunday. Gonna pick LAT here.
Yeah, gotta go with LAT. Yeah, it's just, haven't seen enough from Falcons to even really give a second thought to picking them in either of their first two matches, but they'll have a chance to show us what they got cooking up over there at least.
Next up, FaZe versus Gentlemates. I'm gonna go with Paris, but
yeah,
like that's just weird to pick. Like, even though FaZe did start off last season poorly, we did not pick that. We did not say that they're going to start off.
That's what I said earlier. I'm going with Gentlemates here too, which means that we both have FaZe starting 0-2 a year after they started 0-3 in the Major 1 qualifiers. But if there is a silver lining here for FaZe, they had that winless start to the qualifiers last year, and they ended up winning Major 1. So maybe that's the new recipe for success. But yeah, I just think what we've seen from Gentlemates, I got to pick them here over FaZe. And maybe FaZe comes out hot when the match is actually, I don't want to say the other ones didn't mean anything, but like these are actual CDL matches. Maybe that gets them a little more fired up and they put on more of a show. But based on what we've seen, I got to go Gentlemates here.
Last match of the weekend, OpTic versus G2. I'm going to go with OpTic, but if Paris is able to beat OpTic in the first match, not Paris, if Falcons are able to look even remotely decent and beat OpTic in the first match, then I think this would make it a really interesting second match. But yeah, I'm going to go with OpTic.
Yeah, gotta go with OpTic here. I think before either of the, G2 didn't play in the Kaysan tournament. But before the Monster event, I think this was like a 3-0 OpTic. No, not even a second thought about it. Like probably a DoorDash 25-minute series. With G2's performance in that Monster tournament, maybe they put up a little bit more of a fight, but this is one I still think OpTic takes at the end of the day.
And Pick'em, so I am 2-time defending champion of this podcast. We finished, just to refresh the memories, I finished 167 and 85, and you went 165 and 87. It did come down to like literally the very last match of the season. Tremor 0-1, right? So technically we're all tied going into this season. Trem, you and me, all 0-0. I don't know if he'll do very well. He's definitely the worst of us three in the pick'ems. But yeah, we'll be back next week. Well, more than that, we'll be back hopefully on Sunday to talk about all of the matches. So Sunday evening, obviously after the Sunday matches. And the idea is to do 2 episodes a week like we did for most of last season. One on Sunday after the matches of that week, and then one on like Tuesday or Wednesday of that week. Going into the new matches. So that's the plan. So we'll be back on December 7th, Sunday. The podcast will be up on Monday, December 8th. Please like, subscribe, or follow the podcast feed wherever you're listening or watching on. We're on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Amazon Music, as well as YouTube. Please subscribe to the YouTube channel. Give us a 5-star rating on Apple Podcasts and Spotify. You can follow us on Twitter at JBink with 2 Ks, at Preston Byers, and the podcast stores at Ego Chall Podcast. That does it for me. Bink, take it away.
Yeah, thank you guys as always for all the support. I thought this was going to be a little bit of a quicker episode, but we found enough to ramble on for a good amount of time, so I think it turned out pretty well. Now at this point, 47 hours away from the official start of the 2026 CDL season, so really amped up, really excited to have some COD to watch this weekend, and we'll be back at some point, hopefully Sunday, like Preston said, to break down everything we saw. Probably have some broken GAs and drama to talk about, hopefully, but at the very least, we got some good narratives for these initial matches, so it should be a good opening weekend. I'm excited for it. Hope you guys are too, and hope to see you guys back here whenever we do go live to break it all down again. So thank you as always, and remember to send the chow.